Welcome to SV Forum Thinkers, where we talk about what's happening in the world of energy, climate change and the circular economy. I'm your host, Kate Dundas, and today we're going to be delving into what happened at the recent Sustainability Leaders Summit that was held in Melbourne in March. And we're joined today by Matt Jennifer, who's the Interim CEO of Sustainability Victoria, and Christy Ditchburn, Sustainability Principal at Telstra. Welcome.
Thanks, Kate. Great to be here.
Thank you, Kate. Lovely to be here.
So I think we'll start off by talking about the role of the sustainability professional in corporate Australia. So maybe Christy, if you'd like to talk about what you've noticed change when it comes to working in sustainability.
There were actually some fantastic presentations at the summit, as well as I have some of my own thoughts as well. But where I might start is how sustainability professionals and CSOs in particular have gone from being a corporate relations type of function, a reporting type of function, ensuring that there are the right stories, the right noises that are made from companies in relation to sustainability, to now being people who are there to implement transformational change, to really make impact in the areas of E, S and G. I also noticed at the forum that there was still very much a focus on the environmental aspect, and we'll talk a little bit about that over the course of today, I think, but emissions, of course, climate change, circular economy. But what is also becoming more and more important is the approach that companies and government take on the S. So what is the social impact that we're making? How are we looking after people? How are we ensuring that we have an inclusive type of world? Because if we have a healthy planet, we've got to look after the people who are on the planet as well.
So are you seeing the CSOs, so the Chief Sustainability Officers, able to influence strategy and business?
Absolutely. So CSOs now, and what I'm seeing is CSOs either have a seat at the table with the CEO, or they're very, very close to it and a very strategic advisor to it. CSOs are being pulled in all aspects of strategy. What that means for sustainability professionals is that they need to be able to speak the language of business. So in a company, where do we find the intersection between the value that is created and the impact that we're going to make, and ensuring that that is a positive impact? Customers, investors, suppliers are all looking for companies that have the appropriate sustainability strategies and that are doing the right thing.
Yeah. So in that sense, what do you think is driving the change here? Do you think it's the carrot or the stick?
Probably a little bit of both. I think that there is a growing social conscience that we're certainly seeing, particularly with the younger generation coming through. So when we're recruiting graduates, they want to know what we're doing to make the planet a better place. So I think it's people who are driving the change, but I also think it's investors who are expecting us to be socially responsible, to be environmentally responsible, and they want to understand the credentials for that. The other point I'll make is in relation to human rights. And that is another aspect. So human rights through our supply chain, what are we doing to make sure that we have the transparency in our supply chain so that we don't have issues with human rights?
Yeah. Yes, there's a compelling case for business as well as for the social licence to operate. Now, Matt, what about from the government context? What have you noticed change over the last couple of years? We're sitting here in Sustainability Victoria, an agency of the Victorian government. So what are your observations?
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing Christy talk about, and I picked up some of those phrases, transformation, value. I think the journey of the public sector is not that dissimilar to what we've seen in the private sector. So Sustainability Victoria, SV, we've been around for just shy of 20 years. And certainly there's been a massive shift in the way the public sector looks at sustainability and the way that the public sector embeds sustainability principles in its decision making and its policy policy making. So when we first started back in 2005, the idea of sustainability was very fledgling, it was very immature, and if parts of the public sector had sustainability officers, they were sort of tacked onto the side, they were quite operational and certainly not at the table making contributions to the bigger structural changes. So certainly a huge amount has changed since then. The big transformation has happened over the last 5 or 6 years. We are very lucky to have a government that is very ambitious, setting very bold targets around climate, around circular economy, but also introducing things like the social procurement framework. And obviously government is the largest procurer of goods and services in the economy. And so that social overlay, that going back to what you said, Christy, making sure that our decisions aren't just looking at the sustainability outcomes, which are incredibly important, but how are we utilising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander employment? How are we driving disability employment? How are we making sure that this huge amount of money that we're putting into the economy is actually adding value, is creating value in other areas? And I think that's an important concept. So around the government tables of influence, you are also hearing voices of very influential sustainability and climate change and social procurement advocates, which is great.
So just delving a little bit deeper into supply chains, can you touch on the use of data in increasing sustainability outcomes or human rights outcomes in supply chain?
Data is always a key, and as a sustainability professional, we love data. The more we have, the more we can understand and the more insights that we can get. So there are kind of a number of aspects with supply chains. There's obviously the emissions reduction and the data that can be gathered from supply chains from tier 2, tier 3 and beyond, and the technology that can support that. In the human rights type of space, there's a different kind of data that you need, and the transparency can be quite challenging. One of the things that we've introduced is a worker voice survey. So we work with suppliers and go directly to employees to survey them on what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're worried about. And if those workers who are on the ground have things that we think we should investigate, we work collaboratively with the suppliers to work out where there might be some issues that we can support or investigate. But again, it's not about if an issue is found, it's not about saying to the supplier, we're going to cease the contract with you or we're going to terminate the contract with you. It's about saying, this has arisen, what can we do to support you? How can we address this issue? Because terminating a supplier doesn't lead to any better change or any better outcomes, but working with a supplier does.
Yeah, there's no point being punitive. I think that's a great approach, really, is how can we work together to build that capability to support you to grow? Yeah, it's great.
Well, it's a good segue, Matt. How are we working with businesses at the moment? How's SV working with businesses to support businesses to transition to a circular economy?
So a couple of years ago, we launched a great program on behalf of the government called the Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre, or CBIC, as it's affectionately referred to around the halls here at SV. And really, it's a virtual hub that encourages businesses, like-minded, innovative businesses, to come together, to collaborate, to look at where innovation is happening and try and accelerate that. And I think a key part of CBIC is very much about looking across supply chains. We know there are organisations that have a strong understanding of what happens within their four walls, but less about sort of that engagement with the broader supply chain. So CBIC really is a kind of testing ground almost for those businesses to really look a bit more deeply into their supply chain, look at where there are opportunities for waste reduction. We know that there's a lot has happened globally and here in Australia on sort of recycling and sort of, creating a recycling economy, but far less has been done upstream to really identify those opportunities for waste avoidance and waste reduction. So we really encourage those businesses to work through their supply chain to look at opportunities for waste reduction, for innovation, to look at more circular business models, and also to overtly look for new revenue streams. You know, this isn't just about creating sustainability outcomes. Obviously, kind of that's the intent, but it needs to fit within the ecosystem of that business. It needs to fit within sort of what they're trying to achieve from a profit and growth point of view. So we've seen some amazing stories out of that, businesses that have really looked deeply, found that innovation, managed to make that innovation work, and are showing really strong revenue outcomes as a result of it. So year one, we had a strong focus on food waste. Year two, we had a strong focus on textiles, and at the moment we're looking at design, product design and sector design, and unleashing kind of the even further upstream opportunities that we know that exist. So there's some really good work happening in innovation with businesses. I still think for us, there's a greater opportunity to work with the mid-sized businesses. The reality is an organisation like Telstra doesn't need to come to us for advice. They're already doing amazing, leading things. But I think some of the mid-sized businesses that are struggling to really kind of identify those opportunities, I'd like to see us doing a bit more in that space over the next couple of years, because I think there's definitely fertile ground there.
Okay, we're going to move on to a section called Crisortunities. At least I thought it was called Crisortunities because of our guest. I think it's actually
Crisortunities.
Crisortunities.
That's okay.
I prefer Crisortunities. Let's stay with that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you whether a subject is a crisis or an opportunity, and I want you to react quickly with a nice snappy answer. Okay.
No pressure.
First one, Matt, greenwashing.
It's an opportunity. It's a challenge in the fact that we don't want businesses to be greenwashing, but it's an opportunity at the moment because the ACCC's got such a strong lens on it. The reality is, again, if I go back to the transformations that we need, and a lot of this was explored at the summit, the only way we can do that is if we've got trust. We've got 27 million consumers here in Australia, and they need to trust what they're hearing. They need to trust the labels, the branding. They need to trust what they're hearing from government and industry. And as soon as we lose that trust, we lose the ability to catalyse those people to help us in the transition. So greenwashing, a massive opportunity, and really happy that the ACCC is taking a look at it.
Thank you. Okay, let's do a couple more. Profit versus impact, and how do we untangle them? Do we give up on that argument or not?
I'm not sure you can give up on the argument. The reality is there will always be a tension between those two things. And all of us in this sector can't lose the fundamental sight that financial sustainability for organisations, for our economy, is as important as the other elements of sustainability. Suddenly, if we are making decisions that are cannibalising our ability to be financially sustainable, then that's not ideal. I think the key here, and the panacea, I suppose, that we're all shopping for, is the point where the two intersect, where profit and impact essentially become, no longer mutually exclusive, but actually part of the same mix. So I think where you've got companies or governments or really anyone that's coming up with solutions or products or ideas or services that are, that can generate revenue, generate profit, but still have a significant impact. That's I think that's the gold dust that we're all striving for. And I think to the original question, the very first question you asked about the transformation in the sustainability sector, I think that profit impact intersection is probably the key to the shift that I've seen. I think when I go back to sort of thinking when the frame of corporate social responsibility, CSR, was the big thing, and quite often it was sort of tacked on to the side, and it was, companies that wanted to do good things, but it sort of was loosely aligned to actually their purpose. And then suddenly when the GFC happened and money became scarce, a lot of those initiatives suffered because people couldn't see the link between what they were trying to achieve. I think modern businesses, modern professionals like Christy and her contemporaries are much better at aligning purpose and impact and profit, so that when we're talking about sustainability, sustainability initiatives, we're talking about gain. It tends to be linked to the direction an organisation's going, its ability to generate profit, to generate revenue. So I think the two are increasingly linked, which is great because that's the shift we need to see.
Now, I feel like we've talked a lot about the E and the S in ESG. What about the G?
The G underpins everything. So the way that we think about the G is that it's the baseline for everything that you do. You need the appropriate governance structures in place when you are measuring emissions. You need the appropriate governance mechanisms when you're measuring the social impact, the social returns on investment, and also governance is critical for all of the operations within a company, certainly, and within government as well. So I think that's why we talk less about governance, but it's intrinsically related to everything that we do.
Yeah, it's so important that the three sit together, because historically, governance was a finance principle largely. It was a compliance principle. But now we're starting to talk about governance as the fundamental operating model of an organisation, and good governance being intrinsically linked to social outcomes, to environmental outcomes, to sustainability outcomes, and of course the sort of compliance and finance outcomes. So it's an underloved but definitely important part of that trio.
Now, I'm keen to explore collaboration between the public and private sector, but also between businesses. So maybe we'll go to Christy and think about collaborations between public and private sector. Have you had experience of anything that's worked really well or in fact hasn't?
One of the areas that we are really passionate about in creating an inclusive world is in relation to digital inclusion. So one of the great collaborations that we've had for a long period of time is in relation to a program we run called Tech Savvy Seniors. So that's also in conjunction with public libraries, and it's effectively an education program for seniors to learn how to use the internet, to stay connected. We have great stories about grandparents being able to FaceTime their grandchildren, and particularly over COVID that became a really important area. But there's other areas as well, and if we move over to emissions, for example, and tracking those types of emissions, I think there's a really fantastic opportunity in relation to investing in those technologies that can help support businesses and government to manage their emissions and to track their emissions in an even better way. You mentioned before the purchasing power of government as well, and I think that's another area that public and private sector can really work together in driving the appropriate changes through purchasing power. So if we are moving to a low carbon economy, the decisions that the big purchasers that make can help drive investment, it can help drive innovation, and ultimately help support a lower carbon economy.
And of course, government has the role of creating the framework in which decisions can be made and through legislation. Matt, can you just touch on any examples of really great public-private partnerships that you've seen?
The only way we make these transformations, these huge structural economic transformations happen, is if the public sector and the private sector are rowing in the same direction. I think that alignment is incredibly important. Certainly with the work we do at Sustainability Victoria, we tend not to do anything in isolation. So if we're delivering a program or delivering an outcome, we are always working in partnership with somebody, whether that's a local government or a community group or somebody in industry. I think one of the transformations that's important for us at the moment, where I do see really strong collaboration and alignment between the public and private sector, is in getting new innovative recycling and circular economy infrastructure into the state. A couple of years ago, government came to the table and said, we want to work more closely with industry. We want to put some more money, some more buying power on the table to support industry, and has come through with that. So we've got multiple projects, 30 plus large scale partnerships with industry where we're co-funding new infrastructure to go on the ground to recycle more plastic, more organic waste, more food waste, more electronic waste, a whole range of things. And so I think that's come about because government set a really clear policy direction. We want to achieve this. We think it's important that we achieve this, but we can't do it on our own. How do we bring industry to the table to work together? So, but again, I agree with Christy, there's certainly plenty of other opportunities, particularly in that social procurement space, where perhaps government tends to work in its little bubble around social procurement and industry works in its little bubble, and there's definitely opportunities to leverage that side of things more.
And what about the speed of change? You know, we've got to get our skates on to reach the emissions targets. We've got about 7 years left to reach the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 degrees. So how do you think we get faster?
I'm happy to start because I actually think it's incredibly linked to the conversation we're just having. It's to do with cooperation, collaboration, partnerships between the private and public sector. And really, when you boil it down to the bare minimum, government has a role in setting a really clear agenda, creating the conditions to invest. And if government does its job well and sets those conditions and sets the parameters and brings the community along for the journey, then I think unleashing that might of investment from the private sector, that's what's going to get us there quicker. So I think that collaboration, the better we work together, the quicker we'll be able to enable that transition and make it happen, you know, at the pace we need it to happen. Chrissy, I don't know about your views.
What we've talked about a lot today is the importance of collaboration with public and private sector, but it's also collaboration amongst corporates as well. If I take an example that we have, there is an organisation called Telco Together, and all of the major telcos are part of Telco Together, and it's a fantastic example of the telcos coming together and working on issues that we know that are really important. One of the ones that we are looking at right now is what we can do to support transparency in supply chains. The second one is in relation to domestic and family violence. So telcos have a really significant role to play for people who are affected, victims, survivors of domestic and family violence. And Telstra has, for a long time, done some fantastic work in this area through our partnership with Westnet, and we supply phones to victim survivors and credit. We have a Safe Connections team that people in those situations can get support from a telecommunications perspective. Fantastic work that we're doing. But all the other telcos have got the same types of challenges with people who are in the same types of situations. So what we do is we share what we are doing, we share the frameworks that we're implementing, and we support others because we will only help more people if we work together.
So we might move on to our last section, which is called Winners and Losers. So Matt and Christy, what were your winners and losers from the summit? Now I've heard a lot about collaboration. So collaboration, winner?
Oh, totally a winner. Collaboration is the, I feel like it's the answer to a lot of the problems that we are facing right now. And if we think about the summit itself, when we walked into the room, it was packed, and there were about, I think, 500 people who were there. And when I looked around the room, there were people greeting each other from all different companies. And when I think about my company, so and the team that I've worked in, over time people have gone over to what we might say competitors, and we all came together in that room to try and work out how we're going to solve the biggest problems of that the world has ever faced, and we are only going to be able to solve those if we do it together. So I think collaboration was without a doubt the biggest winner, and even if you look at the LinkedIn posts that come out of the day, I think if we did a word cloud, collaboration would be up in lights right in the middle.
Nice. And how do you do corporate collaboration?
There's formal forums and there's informal forums. So first of all, going to the informal forum, and if we take the summit itself, so many connections right throughout. I think the sustainability profession, with a network, comes with its own network. So we are talking to people all the time to try and understand what different people are doing, what different companies are doing. At the summit itself, there were CEOs, there were CSOs who were all presenting on their sustainability strategy, sharing what they're doing and how they can make a difference. So just that willingness of sustainability professionals to share the different ideas that they have. I loved Reckitt's sustainability calculator, and that's on their website. So for every product that Reckitt has, it goes through a sustainability calculator that says, you know, where are the materials sourced from, how recyclable is it, and a whole lot of others which we, you know, poured over. These are fantastic ideas, and we're all ready to, you know, to share them.
Yeah, that calculator was really impressive.
Yeah.
Single-use plastics, winner or loser?
I think it's, even for two optimists, it's very hard to describe that as a winner. Yeah, certainly a loser. And I think, you know, if you broaden it just away from just single-use plastics and think about sort of the take, make, throw economy, which is single-use plastics is such a great example of you know, how we don't necessarily make smart decisions as humans and consumers. Yeah, I think that permeated through a lot of the summit, a lot of the conversations about how are we being much smarter with the materials, understanding the embodied energy and the embodied impact of the materials that we use, and single-use plastics was definitely a loser on the day, and it should have been too.
Okay, last one, Chief Sustainability Officers as a profession. The answer seems obvious, winner or loser?
It has to be a winner. It's a fantastic profession to be involved in any capacity, actually. And as a Chief Sustainability Officer, you're right there at the heart of corporate strategy, at the heart of government strategy, and you have the potential and the opportunity to make a real positive impact. I was a lawyer for many years before I switched professions, and many of my alumni asked me, you know, how it is in this role, and what it's like, you know, doing something like this. I think the big difference for me is that it's a long game. It is a game that requires a lot of patience and incremental gains and incremental influencing over a long period of time to create great change. But what I think is the incredible part about this profession is the link to purpose and the link to why. Why do I get up in the morning? Because I want to make the world a better place. Can't have much more than that.
And that's a wonderful note to end on.
Great way to
So thank you, Christy. Thank you, Matt. Two optimists.
Yeah.
Collaboration is the way forward. It's been a great chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Kate.
you for having
Thanks,
me.
Christy.